Before we before we get into the nitty gritty of the multiple war fronts, let me ask you about Trump. I know we've spoken about this before, but it does seem now to me, as someone who pores over every word he says and writes, that this is becoming really acute now. He's posting apropos nothing pictures of him with the European leaders, with Greenland in the American Stars and Stripes, with Ukraine in the American Stars and Stripes. He's openly ruminating about setting ISIS and Al-Qaeda against the Lebanese resistance organizations. He is openly talking about running the Persian Gulf and charging people through the nose for the privilege of his Genovese-style protection. In other words, he's acting like he rules the world. Now, you've often called him a narcissist, and frankly, that's the least now of what he is. But it's becoming almost criminal narcissism. It's becoming maybe actionable under the 25th Amendment if there was any sanity left in the political system in the United States. Do you agree?
I agree 110%. I mean, it's an embarrassment. As you rightly pointed out, I've said that he suffers from a narcissistic personality disorder of the most malignant nature, that he is a sociopath, a threat to society, and that he, has created a government that no longer functions in the manner of being the chief executive of a concept premised on the notion of separate but equal branches of government, bounded together by a constitution that unites the people and the government into a constitutional republic. We function as a cult of personality of the most extreme nature. And literally, there's nobody willing to say the emperor has no clothes. Everybody's sitting there, praising this fat, obese, naked man as if he's dressed in the finest, Polo or Gucci. It's an embarrassment, but it's more than an embarrassment. It's it's a sign of the advanced stage of decay of the American Republic that I loved and continue to love. But the Republic that I love no longer exists. We don't have a nation of ideas premised on the notion that we could be a more perfect union if we just keep working toward goals and objectives that we all share. The beauty of the United States was that it was always a nation that had the potential to be better, because that's the notion that we were premised on, to forming a more perfect union. We, the people of the United States of America. That means that we collectively are responsible for the government we're about to create through the Constitution for the purpose of forming a more perfect union. We were a work in progress, and we've always been a work in progress. And that's what I loved about us, is that for all of our faults, and there were many, we were, when we were constituted under the Constitution, slavery was considered to be A-OK. There are many flaws in our country, and these flaws have manifested themselves many ways throughout the 250 years of our the conceptualization through the Declaration of Independence. But today we aren't a nation of ideas anymore. We're a nation that has allowed this brain dead thug to dictate who we are and what we are through social media posts. Again, the insulting nature of government run by social media. The chief executive is supposed to preside over a government bound by the Constitution, agencies and departments. He's supposed to articulate vision that is then passed down to the people who serve him in his cabinet. And these people are supposed to then go down to their subordinates and through an interagency process, reach consensus on how best to, bring this vision to fruition. It's a process of government, of governance. And it's worked, for better or for worse, for the duration of this country. We don't have this today. We don't have that system. There is no interagency process. We have a nation of bureaucrats and technocrats who wake up every morning looking at their computer or their phone for a social media posting that's going to give them direction. We're a nation that has allowed itself to devolve into continuous chaos, and the people that we elect to govern us, their job is now to control chaos, to manage chaos. That's no way to do business. And sadly, that's where we are today. And it's because of Donald Trump. He is the greatest single threat to the constitutional republic and the American people that has ever existed.
Caligula famously appointed his own horse as a proconsul of Rome. I suppose Trump's Caligula's horses, for there are more than one, but they must include this joker who is in power in Damascus that Trump openly boasts that he imposed on the people of Syria, former deputy leader of ISIS, former deputy leader of Al-Qaeda, Zelensky, of course, for a time, Netanyahu, although who's the horse, who's the jockey and who's the mount, might be problematic. The elevation of Lindsey Graham to some paragon of virtue in red panties. The elevation of warlords. He's now talking about the Kurds. He's got an army, he says, that's going to make a ground invasion of Iran. It's the Kurds that he has armed, setting them up, of course, for a bloodbath. And what would happen if they succeeded? What would happen to Iran if Kurds invading from Iraq became the ruling power? The way he treated the prime minister of Iraq in the Oval Office, humiliating him. The man went along with it, I should say, and I'm sure he'll pay a political price for that. But he even asked the prime minister of Iraq if he, Trump, had done him a favor by assassinating General Soleimani, even though one of the most important figures in Iraq was killed alongside Soleimani. These Caligula's horses, there's a whole parade of them. And it's this megalomania, really, that Trump is displaying right now, which is the most disturbing thing to me.
Well, I share your concern, and I could echo everything you just said. I won't, but now we have to reflect on the method behind the madness here. Because we're seeing a pattern emerge. George, everything that you just articulated, a rational human being would say, given an option, given a range of options, the worst possible choice would be the one that President Trump has made repeatedly. He has never made a good choice. He's made a bad choice every single time. We can talk about, for instance, his decision to authorize Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen. Literally, this is the worst choice imaginable, because now it has opened up the reality of a resumption of Yemeni-Saudi conflict that will spill over into the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, causing the closure of this strait at a time when Saudi Arabia has redirected 70% of its oil production through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Remember, this is a president who said he had to sign the MOU because he was running out of oil. He had no choice but to do this, acknowledging defeat, in effect. We have J.D. Vance acknowledging that the MOU was always a charade, simply to buy time to get more oil. So we're getting a clue as to what's going on with this president. He is creating chaos deliberately. He is literally going to, because the reality is the United States today, as you rightly pointed out, we want to be the global hegemon, but we're incapable of being the global hegemon. We lack the resources to actually govern and rule and direct using normative standards, where the person calling the shots is the person who can best influence the situation. The United States has lost the ability to directly influence rational, unfolding situations. What we can do and what we are doing is managing chaos. And so Donald Trump's job right now is to engender as much chaos in the world. Everything he talked about, there's no chance. You know this, George. There's a snowball's chance in hell of the Kurds putting together a force capable of invading Iran, let alone overthrowing the regime. What will happen, though, is that by attempting to do so, articulating this, there will be further chaos, not just with Iran, but in Iraq, spilling over into Syria, spilling over into Turkey. And this is what Donald Trump wants. He cannot, on his own volition, with the resources available to him, dictate outcomes. What he can do is mandate chaos and then seek to control chaos. It's much easier to control chaos than it is to impose order. And this is what this narcissistic madman has done, because the only way he can continue to be a force of relevance in the world is to make the world dysfunctional so that, he can then be seen as pulling strings that don't matter. Who cares if he says that Jolani is a tough guy, a good guy? We know who Jolani is. The point is, Donald Trump has become a literal joke, because the world, the serious world out there, knows that every time he says something, the reality is the exact opposite. Nobody respects this man anymore. Nobody respects this man anymore. But they need this man because the United States is the only nation in the Western world capable of controlling the chaos that we created. But look at Russia, look at Iran. They despise us openly. They recognize that we cannot be dealt with rationally. Russia has declared that Donald Trump is emotionally unstable. Emotionally unstable. That means that they can't predict anything he's going to do. Is this something the average American should be proud of? And the answer is hell no.
Hell no, and a very dangerous state of affairs. Let's run through the wars then, Scott. What's happening right now in and over Iran, and what do you think is going to happen next?
Well, again, I just ask people to reflect on the fact that this isn't the first rodeo. We started a war back in February 28th that ended, I believe, on April 8th. It was 39 days of conflict that we lost, we being the United States. And we lost it for a number of reasons. One, we weren't able to impose our will on Iran. We sought to collapse the regime by murdering their supreme leader. This failed. We sought to eradicate their ability to launch ballistic missiles through direct to kinetic intervention. This failed. We sought to control the flow of oil by seizing control of the Strait of Hormuz. This failed. Every military objective, every political objective failed. And ultimately, we were compelled to seek a ceasefire because we ran out of ammunition. I just want to remind people that the United States of America, the greatest military power on the planet that spends $1 trillion a year, ran out of ammunition. We ran out of the ability to carry out long-range strike, and we ran out of the ability to do precision intercept. So we had to call a pause. Now, we've taken the time to not just rebuild our stocks of oil, but to also strip bare our defenses elsewhere and the defenses of our allies to re-up the arsenal that we're using against Iran. But the reality is we haven't reconstituted our strength. Donald Trump speaks of 3 weeks of military action. This, I believe, is the totality of our capacity to sustain military action against Iran. The first week is ongoing, haphazard strikes to make a point, sort of a shock and awe. It's going to fail. Next week, he's going to escalate, according to him, to take out energy production facilities, the power plants, the bridges, et cetera. This will fail. And then the third and last week is, of course, to hit energy production facilities. But, these swords that he's wielding are double-edged swords. The moment we see right now, Iran is delivering more harm to American military assets and regional allies than we are inflicting on Iran. Their ballistic missiles are doing more harm to us than we're inflicting on them. Now, this is somewhat speculative, but I can say this with the confidence of knowing that 39 days of aerial bombardment of Iran didn't accomplish anything meaningful. Iran has fully recovered, and now we're coming in and we're trying to repeat the same scenario over again. Einstein said the definition of insanity is seeking to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We're insane trying to do this. Now we're going to move to, energy production, meaning the power plants. Does Donald Trump not understand that Iran will respond by taking out the power plants of our regional allies? What happens right now? The temperatures are through the roof in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, in Kuwait City, and Manama, and elsewhere. What happens when they lose the ability to produce the power that gives them the air conditioning? What happens if they take out desalination plants? You've basically made these major cities unlivable. And that's just the beginning, because if we then escalate to take out Iranian power production, oil and gas production, Iran will respond by totally decapitating the energy production capacity of the Gulf Arab states. And people need to understand that this is an extraordinarily dangerous thing. You know, the world needs the energy coming out of the Middle East. It's 25% of the world's energy. Now, people say, well, there's 75% out there, but the world doesn't work in terms of 75%. The world functions as a 100% calculation. And if you start disrupting oil, it doesn't just mean that higher gases. It's not just about gasoline and diesel. This is about producing fertilizer that's used to feed the world. The sulfur that comes from, sour oil, the ammonia that comes from the processing of oil. These are used to create fertilizers that much of the developing world must have to make crops viable. We've already disrupted. There's going to be a global impact that will affect millions of people because of Donald Trump's decisions. And now he's getting ready to shut everything down again. This will affect hundreds of millions of people. And we're talking about the potential of tens of millions of deaths. And if we go through another cycle, it becomes literally exponential, meaning that, the damage done, we haven't recovered, and the damage, it takes less to do more damage going down. There is the chance, if we get a total disruption of Middle East energy for a period of time that falls into the fall of this year, that tens of billions of people are going to die of starvation, hunger, etc., because there will be no food for them. This is what Donald Trump is doing. This is the insanity of the moment that people need to pick up on. And the world needs to start shouting, because if Europe's sitting there being deaf, dumb, and blind to the crimes being committed by the United States, what happens, George, when Africa goes under? When the Sahel, when West Africa loses the capacity to produce food, and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people start a compelled migration because they have no choice. They're dying. They're starving. There's no food. They will migrate across. They will lose tens of millions in the deserts of the Sahara, but they will arrive at the shores of the Maghreb of North Africa, and they will surge into Europe, and Europe has no solution for them. Europe will literally be overrun by these desperate refugees that will suck Europe dry. That's the future of Europe, literally the future of Europe, because of Donald Trump. And what happens in the Middle East? Where do the Iranians go when they lose the capacity to produce the food? They can run to Turkmenistan, Pakistan, but Pakistan's got problems. Turkmenistan lacks the capacity. They will move through Turkey into Europe, and Turkey will be giving them the sign, keep going, keep going, keep going. Europe will be overrun. This is the future of Europe because of the policies of Donald Trump. It's the future of humanity because we have the potential of losing, billions of people. I said tens of billions. I meant tens of millions because there's only 8 billion people in the world today. But the point is, we have the potential of losing billions of people because of this catastrophe that's about to be, and there's no quick recovery. Once this process begins, once the infrastructure of life support deteriorates, it isn't readily constituted. The world will be losing so much of its energy and resources responding to these global catastrophes that they won't be able to put the effort into reconstitution. We're condemning humanity to an absolute decade or more of catastrophe.
And not a single European leader has spoken in the way you just have of the centrality of Europe to all of this. Deaf, dumb, and blind, as you put it, is their attitude. The Europeans, on the other hand, are redoubling their efforts to create more war in the Ukraine. The coalition of the willing, a group of non-entities, deeply unpopular in their own countries where they're not viscerally hated. In the case of Starmer, in the case of Merz, case of Macron, viscerally hated by their own population. But the one thing they can come together and do is to keep building up the ante. in the war against Russia. And Trump seems to have entirely lost his mojo on trying to bring that war to a close. The one he promised 57 times in public during the election that he would stop and finish within 24 hours. 57 times he said that. And he seems to have completely lost his will, if that will ever existed, to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine.
Look, what I think is happening here is that Donald Trump has finally come to the realization that there is no ability to compel Vladimir Putin and Russia to accept conflict terminations on the terms dictated by Europe and Ukraine, and indirectly by the United States, that this is a false hope. And I believe that Donald Trump has come to recognize that from his perspective, the problem is Vladimir Putin. And therefore, Donald Trump is seeking to remove Vladimir Putin from power. Now, any rational person who has been to Russia, I just came back from Russia, because you met with me there, we would know that this is absurd thinking, that the concept of Vladimir Putin being unpopular, the concept of Vladimir Putin being vulnerable to a military coup or some sort of a Moscow Maidan moment where the citizens of Moscow are going to flood into the central square demanding that Vladimir Putin step down. But this is the last gasp hope of Europe and Ukraine, and now the United States. So Donald Trump is desperate for a policy solution, and he has been convinced by people that while you can't have Ukraine win this war, what you can do is exhaust Russia, that you can create the conditions inside Russia conducive to societal collapse. And this is the fantasy of people that have been around for some time. And I believe Donald Trump has now embraced this fantasy. And the Russians have to wake up and understand this. There is no spirit of anchorage. Sergei Lavrov has correctly articulated the United States is agreement incapable. But the reality is that Donald Trump is an enemy of Russia. There is no potential friendship. But now we come into a concept that I'm developing. I call it hybrid diplomacy. In normal diplomatic interaction, you would shut the door. You would say, we can't deal with this, because diplomacy is about, a process that's based upon tact and certain respect for, mutual beneficial stuff. Of course, you negotiate to get the best relationship for you, but there has to be a process where both parties have a buy-in. Today, with the United States, there's only one buy-in, Donald Trump's buy-in today. But remember, the Russians said that he is emotionally unstable. And so now the Russians will simply wait, just like the Iranians will, where one day they'll wake up and Donald Trump will send out a social media post, just the opposite. We can sit here and talk about what Donald Trump said today. But George, that in a week, he could say the exact opposite. And this is what the Russians are waiting for. Not that they're going to believe what he says then, but that will create a window of opportunity for them to, complicate the picture for Donald Trump, inject new ideas, maybe get Kirill Dmitriev to sit down with Witkoff and Kushner and talk about tunnel diplomacy. And suddenly Donald Trump will be speaking about Russian rare earth minerals and the need to invest in Russia. And it buys a window of time until the next time Donald Trump wakes up and decides that Vladimir Zelensky is the epitome of democracy, the Ukrainian version of George Washington that must be supported until death do us part. And it's this kind of fluctuation. Anatoly Antonov, the former Russian ambassador, when I asked him about the 2024 election, I said, "Who do you want to win?" He said, "We're not going to put a name to it. We want the candidate that gives us the greatest predictability." Meaning that we want somebody who is predictable. The outcomes are predictable. We can build policy based upon predictability. Instability, it's impossible to formulate effective policies. And that's where the Russians are right now. They're a hostage to the psychological vacillations of this deranged being in the White House. And they, like everybody in the American government, wake up scrolling social media to see what the hell the lunatic in the White House has posted today. And then they have to create policy to respond to that.
And believe it or not, I'm in China believe it or not, these are not the only wars they're planning. I was just watching General Kellogg talk about what a great investment the war in Ukraine is, because it takes one party off the table, allowing us to concentrate on China. And the Chinese are being set up, I'm convinced, in the Philippines, not Taiwan. The Philippines is being constructed, the South China Sea, over unpronounceable islands unknown to man outside of the area. They are creating a casus belli in the Philippines as the new Ukraine, as the Ukraine for China. I mean, talk about chaos. They can't even beat Iran, but they plan to have a war with China? What madness is this?
It is madness. But let's reflect. You have a poll question, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Should we be concerned about the rearmament of Germany? Well, here you just postulated the question, should we be concerned about a Philippine-U.S. military relationship as opposed to a threat to China? But before we answer that, we have to reflect on a previous military arrangement, the tripartite arrangement between the United States, South Korea, and Japan, that have recently come together and said, we are three solid aligned members with joint singular policy to oppose North Korea and North Korea's nuclear threat. In order to do that, the United States has, of course, flooded air defense systems in the South Korea and Japan. And we told the Japanese that you can get the Tomahawk missile, so you have a 400 missile counterstrike capacity. We told the South Koreans that you can sit in on our nuclear war planning, that everything's kosher. And yet, because of the war in Iran, we had to go in and strip bare, without even consulting them, the totality of their air defense. And we told the Japanese to pound sand on Tomahawk missiles. So now you're the Philippines government, and you're saying, America's coming, promise us rainbows and unicorns, and it's going to be wonderful. The United States can't deliver on anything. What weapons are we going to send to the Philippines? We have sent everything to Iran, and in 3 weeks, we will run out of ammunition. There is no capacity. So now the Chinese, who aren't stupid, are looking at this saying, we hear bad rhetoric, but the reality is the United States has zero capacity to act on this. Just like we hear out of Germany, how they're going to rearm. I mean, hell, we just had a former German defense minister tell the Russians, not only are you going to lose Crimea, but you're going to lose Kaliningrad. Germany wants Kaliningrad back, they said. And they're talking about tripling the size of the German army and all this stuff. But the fact is, Germany has zero capacity to do any of this. There is no military capability in Germany to do anything they talked about. They lack the capacity, the industrial capacity. 60% of the manpower in Germany says we will not fight in a war, even if we're invaded, which means that Merz would have to do conscription. If you want to watch the German government collapse quicker than a house of cards in a tornado, try to do conscription right now as justification for taking Kaliningrad back from the Russians. It won't fly. There's zero chance that Germany will rearm, just like there's zero chance the United States will have a meaningful military relationship with the Philippines.
And lastly, believe it or not, the Board of Peace hasn't met, has become bored of peace. Nobody knows where the money went. The Israelis are about to pack the remaining 2 million or so Palestinians in Gaza into what Haaretz described as the most humane concentration camps the world has ever seen. I don't know if they meant it ironically or they were being serious, but that was what the paper of record in Israel brought us, with a picture of these hutches, rabbit hutches or hen houses that they were going to somehow pack millions of Palestinians into prior to the world accepting them as refugees. Netanyahu looks to be in deep trouble in the coming Israeli elections in October, I think. Ben Gvir is currently ahead in the opinion polls. the war is still raging in Lebanon, in Syria, the Middle East track, never mind the Persian Gulf, never mind Central and Eastern Europe, never mind the South China Sea. The good old Middle East, the Levant, is still a powder keg waiting to explode, isn't it?
100%. And it's just going to get worse for the poor Israelis. We go back to Donald Trump and his 3-week plan. And what happens at the end of the 3rd week when we've launched everything, we have nothing left, we've blown up energy production, energy power generation, and the Iranians have responded in the Persian Gulf's in chaos. Does the United States just walk away? No, we activate phase 4, where we give Israel the green light to resume operations against Iran. Iran will, inflict horrific harm on Israel. This is the chaos that Donald Trump is seeking to generate. I don't know where Israel thinks they're going, but I do know this. If you build a concentration camp and you put rabbit hutches in there, you might as well name it Auschwitz, Dachau, and any of the other names of the death camps, because that's what it's become. And for Israel to go down this path means that they've totally lost the script. Now, we know, you and I have known they've lost the script a long time ago, but to go down this path, it makes it impossible for anybody to articulate anything rational that Israel has a legitimate right to exist. I believe that Israel is working itself into non-existence. I don't know the methodology of their death, but I know that Israel as a nation state will die, and will die soon, because of people like Ben-Gvir, because of the horrific governance policies of Benjamin Netanyahu, and because of the indifference of Donald Trump. Again, for somebody who's supposed to be, under the sway of Israel, he's doing more to ensure the destruction of Israel as a nation state than any other man alive, because Israel is literally on a highway to hell. It will not end well for Israel. And the one man that could stop Israel on this path, Donald Trump, refuses to do so. Instead, he enables these genocidal policies. George, I just want your listeners to close their eyes and just think of the horrific photographs from World War II, where the surviving slaves of the German concentration system were found by American soldiers and Russian soldiers in their beds, unable to move. They're starved, cadaver-like corpses. This is what Israel is proposing for 2 million Palestinians, and the world is silent about this.
Silent, yeah. Might a goal of this chaos that you described so brilliantly be the suspension of democratic life in the United States? Might it, for example, be some kind of prelude to the midterms being postponed, even canceled, democracy itself being a kind of martial law being in place in the U.S.?
Under normal circumstances, I would say no, because I still believe that there's a sufficient number of Americans who take the oath, uphold and defend the Constitution, to believe that document is viable. And therefore, if the president gave unlawful orders regarding manipulation of an election and suppression of vote, that sufficient people, especially at the governor level at the states, would say no. But now we come to the chaos theory that you injected. There is going to be global calamity on a scale where there's the potential of global calamity that will resonate into the United States, creating the potential of a state of emergency where, traditional democratic norms and values will be suspended. And this is a potential. I've been wondering why Donald Trump is behaving in such a normal, insane fashion. Meaning we know he's insane, but there's not the panic of Adolf Hitler. One would be expecting, kind of facing what you're facing, that this would be Adolf Hitler in the bunker as Berlin, losing his cool and sweating and swearing and eventually blowing his brains out. But no, Donald Trump seems to be pleased about what's happening, because I think he understands that the only path to his political survival, and therefore the survival of the Trump legacy, which he cares about more than anything, more than America, is to ensure victory in November. And that can only be assured through the suspension of democratic norms and values, and that this chaos that he's engendering, as I said, every decision he makes when given a range of options would be the worst possible decision, unless your goal is absolute collapse of societal norms, the engendering of chaos globally so that Donald Trump alone can be the manager of the chaos. And he manages it in a way that creates the conditions for his continued political viability. Sadly, I'm moving in that direction in terms of my analysis.